Okay, so I'm getting out of my spiritual slumber, and I just got to get this off my chest. As we are all very much well aware of the Iran situation, as along with the Venezuelan situation, and I think most of us who have, some sort of pulse are kind of livid. First of all, of course, at the US and its cohorts, the G7, Israel, naturally. But more than that, the response from the so-called BRICS countries, right? The global south. For the life of me, it's like I don't really expect China to basically spit the dummy and full on attack the US and say, okay, like one Venezuelan, if one Venezuelan or one Iranian is harmed, then I'm going to, kick your butt. Nothing of the sort. However, to consistently basically do nothing is a little bit of a disappointment from my personal perspective. Okay, I've studied, but study is a crazy word to use because this is just normal human common sense. I have lived a life from that of a child to an adult, and now moving towards my, middle-aged, senior type of autumnal winter phase in life. So I have, been around the block a bit. So I've seen what silence versus actually just saying something versus a full-on fist fight and the repercussions of each action that you choose to take. And I can tell you for a certain fact that if you do not have anyone else's back, no one's going to have your back either. And I know the common rebuttal to this is that China is playing the game of Go, whereas the West is playing a game of chess. And so we don't know this grand strategy. And I admit I don't, because I don't even know how to play Go. All I know is that with Go, there are no superior pieces in the game. So it's pure strategy. And basically you just have to grab as much space as you can. And I understand that that's what China has been doing for the past 40 something odd years, because if you take a look at the biggest trading partners, of course now it's basically all on China's turf. Now China wins on that front, in that it has been a very peaceful rise, and it has been able to achieve pretty much the top position. I mean, the PPP count anyway, and soon the GDP will reflect this as well. But if you talk about who will not talk behind China's back, there are very few. And I'm not trying to make this sound like a petty schoolyard thing, but that is basically what life is. The biggest lessons that we learn in school are not math, spelling, or geography. The biggest lessons that we learn in life, in school, are basically human interactions, hierarchies, our pecking order, what happens when people make certain decisions, right? As we all know, the most popular kid isn't the smartest kid always. The smartest kid isn't always the most athletic. The most athletic kid isn't always the most recognized, surprisingly, right? So these things are not to be basically put in a certain category and labeled forever, this is going to be that way, because there are no firm categories. I remember in my high school, the smartest girl that was there, she was blonde hair, blue-eyed, kind of Aussie girl, right? And she wasn't bad looking, but she wasn't the most popular girl. But she was the smartest one by far. But the most popular girl was also a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl who didn't register as much in the kind of report stakes, the grade stakes, as this other one. But she was more popular. So it's not purely on credentials or those qualifications, those tangible qualifications that one can visibly see that will determine who resides at the top. Now, this is what I'm saying is the problem with China. The modern day Republic China that we know of, the modern day China, of course, is not the imperial China of the past, okay? So where we have the emperors ruling and the mandate of heaven, even though the mandate of heaven still is a very profound concept in Chinese culture, it always has been. And I know that in order to, quote unquote, get this mandate of heaven, it's part of the Taoist theory to not work against things, to basically use the minimal amount of energy or exertion to achieve the best outcome. But that doesn't always mean sitting on the sidelines and then basically doing nothing, because sometimes the shortest or the least amount of energy expenditure in the long run could be that initial big punch that you exert right when things start happening. If you weaken your enemy right at the beginning, then first of all, it acts as a deterrent. And secondly, if you visibly weaken your opponent right from the start, it basically dismantles their ability to regroup, to realign, to get more resources, to start again, right? So that big punch doesn't necessarily have to occur at the beginning. It can occur midpoint. But the least expenditure of energy doesn't mean a consistently low kinetic, non-movement type of understanding. I don't know if people get what it is that the point that I'm trying to make. Now, what I think with China, what China is doing is consistently exerting a very low kinetic response in terms of violence or aggression, though it is exerting a lot of energy in terms of creating, and that means manufacturing in today's society. Okay, so it's producing a lot, but it's using nothing to safeguard what it produces. This is very evident because now the Panama ports are being taken. Okay, now the most heartbreaking thing is Maduro, Venezuelan's Maduro, was one of those characters who genuinely believed in the New World Order, that believed in the China dream, because you can see right at the Caracas meeting with the Chinese delegation team, right? And just even prior, he was waving the Huawei phone. So he was all Team China. And then when he got kidnapped, what did China do? Yeah, China condemned. China said, yeah, this is wrong. This is a violation of international laws. But then what did it swiftly say right after? That China is willing to work with whatever governance or administration that will take over from Maduro. So what does this personal connection that Maduro had with Xi Jinping, with the Chinese delegations, what did it mean? Like, on a human-to-human level, it meant nothing. And I know people are going to say, but what are you talking about? These are like grand geopolitical strategic moves. What do you mean person to person? What does interpersonal connections really have? It actually has a lot to do with everything. Every person who has ever made a mark in our world has been able to move people on a very fundamental human level. If you think about Malcolm X, if you think about China's Sun Yat-sen, right? They have all been movers simply because they have evoked something primal in the human animal, something that cannot be denied. Like, once you've been moved, you cannot say, I haven't been moved, because that new idea, that paradigm shift lives within you now, right? So what the Chinese have done is, they jailbreaked, like, out of the system, the 500-year brutal Western colonial system. They are the first ones to jailbreak that system by basically using the lowly mechanism of what, quote unquote, third world countries, the global south, were supposed to do, which is all the dirty jobs of digging and just selling off the minerals, but not doing any of the tech stuff, so they don't get the patents. Okay, so they don't do rents. They only do the dirty and simplistic tasks, right? So China used that and leveraged it against the West by engaging in the jobs that were destined for the so-called inferior peoples, and it turned the whole order upside down. And I get that philosophy because it is the Chinese who actually created the concept of when you make a vase, the most important thing is the empty space inside, not the ceramic that creates the vase, because that's the content that you're trying to hold. And I get that. So they did it. This is pure Chinese philosophical understanding. And I get that. However, what they are misunderstanding is that to go along with that your entire life, to not moderate that theory is also wrong. The first time China collapsed, and I get it, because they were under Manchu rule, so they weren't under the Han Chinese, and hence there was nothing to fight for. But they don't understand the reverberations of doing things like this. And trust me, I'm not giving Japan a pass. Yes, I do live in Japan, but I came to Japan when I was very young and I wasn't interested in history. I mean, now that I know, I'm not so sure if I would have come to Japan, knowing what I know now. So I'm not giving Japan a pass, but you've got to understand the Meiji Restoration happened largely because the Japanese at that time, who revered China as basically the big brother, what it does to the US today, openly could not hold its own against the Western powers when the final line was exercised by the brutal West, right? And of course, the Japanese seeing that, instantly they go, okay, whatever theories the great China espouse actually has no bearing in reality. And hence, they quickly turn themselves into a rich military country. I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't agree with what they did in Asia because they just wanted to be the white man of Asia. But I'm saying there's a reason why they turned so quickly. And if you think about it, would you forever stick by somebody who was heavy on the rhetoric or heavy on the philosophy, but who had no or could produce no worldly justification for their beliefs? You really couldn't, right? In the long term, you would lose heart. And while I am happy that China is insistent on peace, and this is not being Orwellian, this peace mandate depends on who you are having this kind of social discourse with. For example, I can sit down and have a heart-to-heart with somebody who is also on the same wavelength as me, and I would debate that person ad nauseum if I disagreed with their point. However, if I'm sitting in a bar and an Arnold Schwarzenegger replica came and he just vehemently disagreed with me, you know what I would do? I would just shut up. I would just say, oh yeah, it sounds reasonable, and I would leave because I don't want to get my head smashed in. But I'm very petite. I'm a petite vegetarian female, an Asian female, so I'm tiny. However, if I was built like a brick shit house and I had some sort of martial arts or self-defense background, and this same annoying person came in with and decided to vociferate something that he truly believed in that was totally against mine, would I argue my point? Yeah, of course I would. Because even if I don't win, the best or the worst outcome is we would have a draw. So I would have nothing really to lose, even though I wouldn't have anything to gain in a bar brawl except pride. Now, that's what I'm saying is the point with China. If North Korea can have only a handful of nuclear weapons and the US will already not attack it, how is it that China, with an arsenal of 300 or 400 the last time I checked, be so afraid of confrontation that it just will not stick up for any of its friends? Why? All it takes is for China to draw a line in the sand, and the US would immediately rethink their posturing and their actions. Immediately. Because now you're looking at a peer competitor. But China will not do that. China is one of those people. Okay, how do I put it politely? You know, we all have a friend, right? And they're very boastful and they talk a lot. They talk big within the group. Oh, yeah, and I wanted to say this to my boss. And yeah, and I was just thinking, oh, why does blah, blah, blah? And then you know, deep down inside, both you and this friend know that this friend does nothing. Like every time push comes to shove, this person just sucks it up. But then goes out after when you have drinks or, you're watching a movie at home, and then they go off claiming how much they wanted to punch this person in the mouth for saying that, how indignant they felt. But you know what? How many times can you listen to the same inane chatter before you go, nah, this person is not going to do anything. This person's just going to take it. And finally, you start having some understanding of why that boss or that asshole that this friend keeps talking about is actually so wantonly awful to your friend. Because this friend literally does nothing. And that's what I'm saying. Like, Sun Yat-sen came at a time in which he had a vision for China. What would the modern day China look like? And he specifically said that China was a sub-colony. That unlike the Philippines or Korea that was under one brutal colonial ruler, China was carved out 8 parts. So it wasn't serving one colonial master. It had to serve 8. So it was basically even lower than a country that had been colonized by one master, right? And the biggest aspiration that he had for the Chinese population was to move away from the Hui, or the immediate tribal mentality, and come together as a nation. So the loose sand, Chinese people are kind of like loose sand that is not capable of forming anything structurally sound, because they're too involved in their kind of community groups, their family, and their immediate kind of tribe, not tribes, but the provincial kind of group. And he was saying, what would it take to turn the Chinese around so they acted in unison as one national, with one national identity? Then his thinking further evolved so that he actually said, no, it is the Asian voice that is de rigueur, that is necessary, that is something that we should aspire for. So if one Asian rises, naturally it would lift the other Asians up. And that's why Sun Yat-sen was actually really, well, whether he's pro-Japan or wasn't pro-Japan, that's another thing, but he did support the Japanese fighting back and pushing back against the West. However, further on down, of course, he actually passed away before he saw the brutality that the Japanese exercised towards the Chinese and towards other Asians. He had kind of like a slight change of heart because the Russian side suddenly joined the kind of the oppressed Asian side. So then he could not pin it on racial categories anymore. And also he began to see the shift of the Japanese towards the West. So these racial lines, these demarcations were not so clear. But Sun Yat-sen's vision for China was basically it is a nation that was oppressed, and so his main focus then became standing with the oppressed. So if that is the case, the corollary of that would be if you stand with the oppressed and the oppressed stands with you, then it is within your best interest to help those who are supporting you. This is not even a radical proposition. This is just common sense. And this is why when before Venezuela, there was a Syria, by the way, which we've all pretty much forgotten, right, with Assad. I know towards the end, there were rumors that he was willing to turn and blah, blah, blah. But let's just say when Syria fell, people were saying, okay, well, Syria only comprises very little of China's energy needs, and also the BRI project, it can just bypass Syria as well. The only peg that it can't lose is the Iranian peg, and then you see the whole Maduro fiasco. And once again, you get these people that say, well, it's only 4% of China's energy needs, and it was heavy crude. It needed refining, blah, blah, blah. China doesn't actually need Venezuela. Okay, now we're hitting Iran. Okay, the Ayatollah now is dead officially. So Iran is basically one of those main arteries which will affect China. And China's still not doing anything. And once again, the whole Starlink fiasco last time, right, where Russia was able to basically control it. What happened here? Why did Israel get the coordinates of the leaders of Iran, where they were residing, where they were hiding? How did this happen again? Now, remember, China has this satellite system, the Beidou system, right? That is supposed to be so accurate that it can find the coordinate of a pebble on the ground when I read like a few years ago. How is it with that level of accuracy, it cannot detect that the incoming Israeli missiles, where they were trying to hit in Iran, and for the Iranian leaders to evacuate? Why couldn't China get the heads up on that? So I'm not an engineer, so I could not even qualify and quantify what kind of technology there is in China. All I do is read the news, right, and listen to everybody else who talks on these subjects. But China is supposed to be that much ahead. And it is only legacy, like the GPS systems with the branded names, which give them the edge. Not so much if you compare what the GPS system, Galileo versus the Beidou and Glasnost can do, right? However, that being said, where's the real life application? Like, if taking Iran down is not strategically important to China, then what is? And so this is what I'm saying. I'm all for a peaceful rise, but in a certain context, it depends on who your opponent is. If it is another civilized opponent, even though it is a competitor and opponent, but a civilized one, yeah, you can talk things through. But let's face it, the West are brutes. They are so animalistic, so primal that they cannot understand anything short of a fist in the face. Like, are we still trying to debate that you can negotiate, that you can talk to Westerners? Are we still on this thread? All they respond to is a fist in the face and a knee in the groin. So I've no idea this long-term strategy, this go versus chess strategy, a strategy that China has. It better be a move that is capable of dwindling itself to that final piece, and within that final piece, China can basically turn the whole board back to the original space that it captured to begin with. Because if it doesn't have a move that is that powerful, China definitely will not become the world's next on par or parity superpower. It will be the US again. And once the US clinches that, guess where all these G7 countries that are now groveling to China, what are they instantly going to do? Here's my prediction. If the US takes Iran down, because it's already taken Venezuela, then it takes back all the other Latin American countries. I mean, it's already basically conquered Mexico. What's her face? Sheinbun or whatever her name is, isn't doing crap. I mean, she's just putting up a little bit of resistance, but she's not actually doing so much. Okay, so Mexico is pretty much gone, and Mexico was a good economic basically piece for China to use, strategically speaking. So that's gone. Lula da Silva's Brazil. Okay, how long is that going to last when all its friends are fallen? How long will it last in America's backyard? And so that's what I'm saying. What China is doing, I hope, because I'm just, who am I? I'm a nobody. So I hope I'm just too stupid to see this grand move that China has, because I understand the rare metals move. It's taking the most basic foundational move, the foundation, and it's trying to rock the US through that. But let's be totally honest here. This rare earth thing, right? The fact that America is behind on its schedule, like the Lockheed Martin, we all know the fiasco of it trying to deliver the planes and things like that. We all know that. But the fact that it is still able to support Israel, it is still able to support Ukraine's Zelensky, it kind of means these rare earth metals chokehold is maybe not as, I wouldn't say it's not crucial, but that timeline of it being the last line for the US is probably not as imminent as the Chinese think it is. Now, we don't know what happens in black markets in which these like rare earth metals can be actually sold, bypassing official channels so the US can somehow still get them. I don't know. But that line that China has basically conjectured of when the US would run out, it's probably not going to be fast enough for China to lose significant ground that it has already basically accomplished. So this is what I'm saying. So now it becomes a race against this time, this clock, right? And that's provided that in another 2 odd years, Trump honors the election process and goes down. Because if it doesn't, Trump will definitely take Canada, Greenland, because it already doesn't give two Fs about any of these international rules. So it will go and take them. So these countries now that are siding with China or like thinking of alternatives, you know what white people are like. They will grovel to the colored segment of the population because they are severely losing something. Okay, they are not benefiting in the way that they feel they deserve, right? But as soon as there's a small sliver of hope returning back to the white camp, they are the first to basically abandon their colored friends. We all know this. Those of us who've grown up in the West know this. Yeah, we might get that, you know, weight, not conventionally, the kid who has that unconventional weight stigma, or the kid that is shockingly uncool or uncouth or whatever term you would like to use, that is rejected by the white kids who come and join the Asians or the black kids, right? But as soon as you get one other Asian that accepts them, they instantly dump our team and move. So what makes anybody think that this archetypal story is not going to appear in the political world? It absolutely will. Mark my word, it absolutely will. So if you don't want this to happen, if you want to keep your gains, if China wants to keep its gains, it has to occasionally flick off this mode, this one face that it's wearing, and occasionally go apeshit and then turn it down again. This is what makes people respect someone, by the way, is not be constantly on one channel or one setting. Now, we all know what that means, right? For example, a person who normally doesn't say much, but once they get a little aggro, once they get a little testy, and then they actually say something, people listen. It's just like the person who talks a lot. If they suddenly become quiet, people notice that silence, and then they go, whoa, what's happened? So if you are always consistent with one mode, one face, one rhetoric, one type of propaganda, one type of theory, in the end, you're going to lose anybody who even believed in you, even a little. You've got to change things up occasionally in order for people to follow. The spontaneous factor that Trump has, which is making himself look like a fool, and it's tiring because he's going the opposite side of what China is doing, being unrestrained, consistently unrestrained. So people are also tired of that. But people are also tired of China never doing anything. Like, I've remained mum for Syria, for Venezuela. But this Iran thing, like this morning when I woke up, I was just like, what the hell is going on? Why aren't the Chinese and Russians doing anything? You're already at the critical end game here. Because right now, how vulnerable the US is, you'll never get another point in history in which its G7 allies, minus that bootlicker Japan, right? Besides Japan, they've already turned against the US. Still, China is not going to exercise that coup de grace, that final punch that pushes the US like the kiss of death. Take it out of its misery, and China will not do this. Why? Okay, yeah, I got nothing more to say while having a lot of things that are kind of percolating in my mind. I was just so livid at today's news. I just don't know what to do. So yeah, I mean, what can I do? I can't do anything. I'm just a nobody. But yeah, thanks for letting me get this off my chest.